There's two problems with it, really. I mean, one is there is a much higher incidence of food poisoning in the United States. But the second one is the animal welfare that the chlorine is concealing. It's not the chlorine itself that's the problem. It's the fact that it allows chickens to be stored in horrific conditions. I mean, they're not able to move. They're like the living dead, these chickens. They have sores where there should be feathers. They're living in their own waste. They're unable to peck or eat. They really are in horrific conditions, pumped with antibiotics and other things that allow them to live in conditions like that and not die. Some of them are so unnaturally large that their hearts give out, their legs give out. And we have much, much higher standards of animal welfare here, and we don't use those kind of intensive chemicals. And so if you allowed this kind of food into the British market, British farmers who have massively increased their standards over recent years would be completely unable to compete.
Tom, why would you ever want to eat a chicken that's been kept in those sorts of conditions?
Well, I think we're underestimating what battery farming looks like in this country. It's not pretty. We all know... Never mind
battery farming. We're talking about battery farming in the United States.
Well, exactly. But we know that the case is that it's not lovely and luscious green fields for those chickens. And there are cheaper chickens that are kept in less humane conditions, and there are free-range chickens that are kept in much nicer conditions. And it should be for the consumer to choose.
Yeah, but Tom, we don't have to spray our chickens with chlorine.
No, but we spray our salads with chlorine.
Nasty... Yeah, but with all respect to the lettuce, I'm not worried about the conditions, that, the way that lettuce is treated. The thing is that chickens are kept in such intensive conditions in American farms that, unfortunately, the spread of the bacteria and the incidence of the bacteria is so great that the chlorine gets rid of it or covers it up when it's then put to market.
Well, perhaps it would be a good idea to import some of those more clean practices over to this country, because look at Campylobacter, for example. It's almost 10 times the rate of incidence in the US than it is over here. There are certain diseases that are much more prevalent in Europe than there are in America, because the Americans are more clean at that last stage.
So, Nick, do we really need to clean up our own house before we let the American chicken in?
Well, I'm not saying that things couldn't get better in this country. Of course they could. I mean, there's no question that chickens are also kept in bad conditions in this country. But really, it's a different standard in the United States. And it's not just chicken. I mean, you look at something like baby food. I mean, baby food is very well regulated in this country. In America, it has added salt, added sugar. It's not regulated. It's got E numbers. They've even found arsenic in baby food, in quite a lot of baby food, in trace amounts. In the United States, that would never happen in Europe because of the way we regulate the market here.
Tom is saying that Campylobacter in chickens is much worse here than in the United States.
Far more people come down with food poisoning in the United States than here.
That's not the question. Is Campylobacter worse in chickens here than it is in America?
It's not my understanding, no. I mean, I'm happy to look at
the figures. In its most recent round of testing, the US Department of Agriculture found a significant amount of the bacteria, Campylobacter, the most common cause of food poisoning, in 30% of chicken carcasses, 26% of chicken parts, and 58% of mechanically separated chicken, which is used to make things like chicken nuggets. If we compare that, in the UK, the government's Food Standards Agency found 54% of chickens had traces of the bacteria, but only 6% had the highest levels. So a smaller proportion of the chickens here had the highest levels.
But when we look at people who actually come down with the disease or with the infections, it's much higher in the UK, or rather in Europe, than it is in America. And if we look at these European practices, it's not so long ago that we were all eating horse. Let's be real about the situation in the European Union. It's not this land of milk and honey that it's being presented as. And actually, anyone who's been to America, who's eaten American food, knows that it's not this disaster zone that's being portrayed. I think there's a lot of xenophobia, actually, in this argument. We're trying to make America seem scary and Europe seem wonderful. It's not the case.
Why do we want to be importing chicken from America in the first place when there's plenty of it here anyway?
Well, I think that's just if we're going to go down that argument with almost anything on trade, we might as well become North Korea.
It's just a question, but seriously, why would we when we have
comparative advantage? Let's go back to Adam Smith. The reason why countries rose up from the dire situations that we were all in 300 years ago is because we started to trade with one another. That's a
the reason
good thing.
that we would want to import.
Richer.
People want to import American chicken is because it's cheaper.
Well,
Isn't that
it can drive quality, it can drive standard, it can drive down price, it can do all of these things. And actually, what the key thing here is labelling. As long as people have that choice between going to a shop, buying American chicken, buying British chicken, that could be really good, because we can compete on quality, not just price.
Nick, you might have an issue with the quality and the standards.
Yeah.
But it is true that this will be cheaper. And for Brits who want cheap food and cheap chicken and access to, you know, a good quality protein at a cheaper price, you would be denying them that option.
But the problem is, of course, you can make anything. I mean, you know, make it in slave labour. You can make anything cheaper if you want to. If you want to drive down standards enough.
Crass
but no, it's not a crass comparison. Actually, the workers' rights at some of these chicken farms are absolutely horrific because people also end up getting sprayed with all sorts of chemicals and so on. Of course, I've been to America.
Have you eaten chicken in America?
Yes, I've eaten chicken in America.
So what was the issue there? You didn't come down with any sort of
No, but there is a higher likelihood I would have done.
That's not
true. The problem is it is true, and the problem is the animal welfare of the chickens, the cows, the pigs. I mean, pigs, for example, in America are routinely fed with stuff that is banned in Russia and China. Right? This is not just European standards. American standards are absolutely rock bottom.
European scientists actually disagree with European politicians on this. The EU's own scientists have said that there's no problem with washing chickens in chlorine, and yet there's a political argument because of basically ideological campaigners. It's not about the science, and what the British government said just last week is that in trade will be governed by science, not by activists.
Which
not
by genetic modification. That's what that means. It's a shorthand for genetically modified foods coming into this country.
Are you against, for example, golden rice that has...
Yes, I am against
You're
it.
against
I am against it because it allows corporations to control the food system.
Okay, let's stay with chicken and not go to rice yet.
But I'm sorry, this is an anti-scientific argument.
The Farmers' Union are worried about British farmers. They're producing good quality, high standard chicken that doesn't need to be washed in chlorine. And obviously that takes a certain amount of investment, which means you need to keep the price above the price of cheap imported chicken. Are you worried about farmers, British farmers here, and their livelihoods if a trade deal is struck with a country which could flood us with cheap chicken that puts their business at risk?
I have great faith in our farmers being able to produce things of quality. And if we look at other groups, for example, the Countryside Alliance, what they're saying is what really matters here is labelling. As long as people know where their food comes from, they think that British farmers will be able to sell that high-quality British food.
And you're eating chicken, it's not going to say on it, is it, this is chlorinated?
No, but I think if I went to McDonald's, I'd think that the chicken would probably be on less quality than if I went to a high-class restaurant. That's the way that price signals work. And actually, the key thing about how packaging works in the European Union at the moment is we don't know where a lot of this food comes from. You can buy chicken, for example, that says it's come from Ireland, and all it has to be done is packaged in Ireland, and actually it can come from much further afield within the European Union.
But within the EU.
Right, but that's different. There is a huge difference of quality within that area, and if we look at what a group like the Countryside Alliance is saying, it's not saying we should keep out new food to our market, it's saying it should be labelled clearly.
But the American negotiators, the American businesses who are pushing for this to come into our markets are pushing against labelling. It is in the US negotiating objectives for a deal with Britain that our labelling is wrong. They actually don't want our food to be labelled like this. They're saying you can't influence consumer behaviour through this kind of labelling.
Accepting that this is a negotiation, there's give and take, and I think it's a benefit to consumers in this country if we're allowing people to buy food from all over the world, and then perhaps our side would argue for clearer labelling.